Hey everybody, this is Joe Joseph, and this is the DailySheeple.com's Daily News Brief, Part 7, and the final part of my little mini-series here, A Brief History of the New World Order. So I want to start today, the 90s. The 1990s really saw an acceleration of the plan. And I'm going to go over a couple of things now, some people that definitely played a pivotal role in advancing this agenda. And the first one I want to start off with is George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush is the father of former President George W. Bush. And in one of his State of the Union messages, this was in 1991, you can go look at it, he says something that's very, very interesting and very symbolic of what the overall plan is about. It says, this is what he said, quote, "What's at stake is more than one small country. It's a big idea, a new world order to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind based on shared principles and the rule of law. The illumination of 1,000 points of light, the winds of change are with us now." Does that not sound like cryptic code? Almost like Al Qaeda's trying to activate a terrorist cell? I mean, the chair is blue. The illumination of 1,000 points of light, the winds of change are with us now. I mean, it's crazy. Anyway, Theosophist Alice Bailey, which is another thing I'll get into in another news brief, to discuss Alice Bailey and what she's all about and what her role was in creating the United Nations. I mean, it is a crazy, sick, dark road to go down. But anyway, Alice Bailey used the very same expression, points of light, in describing the process of occult enlightenment. And that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. So we'll get into that. And Alice Bailey also is known as the founder of the Lucis Trust. And the Lucis Trust, at one point in time, was known as the Lucifer Trust. And the Lucis Trust is the printing wing, the print media wing of the United Nations. Unbelievable. But let's continue. In June of that same year, world leaders are gathered for another closed-door meeting of the Bilderberg Society in Baden-Baden, Germany. Now, while at that meeting, this is what David Rockefeller said in a speech. Listen to this. Now, before I start, I want to preface that you've seen the fake news narrative being thrown around, and President Trump has called out members of the press and organizations of the press, calling them flat out fake news. Well, listen to this. If you need any validation that President Trump is right, here it is. Quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we'd been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." So right there, he's thanking the New York Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Time Magazine for playing ball with the Bilderbergers, the New World Order, the banksters, the intellectual elite is what they call themselves. Think about that for a second. They think that they're smarter than you. Let me tell you something. When it comes to entrepreneurialism, and you can make the case that John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, they all built their fortunes from nothing. Okay? They started just like us. Anybody that enters into entrepreneurship, wants to make their way, wants to be successful, knows that it takes a lot of trial and error oftentimes you fail 1,000 times before you're successful once. Thomas Edison said it best. I mean, that's the way it is. It's just try, fail, try, fail, try, fail. It doesn't mean that you're intellectually elite because you're successful. It just means that you finally got it right. The odds were finally in your favor, you know? Now, some people, they have a natural gift for this kind of stuff, and they don't deal with, you know, a lot of the hassles that we deal with here down at the bottom floor. But I can tell you that there is nothing special about these people. But boy, they think they're special. They certainly do. So much so that they know what's best for you. And they're going to force their will upon you and everybody else in the world. And that, my friends, is just unbelievable. So good old David Rockefeller, the I know what's best for you spokesman in 1991. Up next, May 21st, 1992. And we go to our good friend, Henry Kissinger, who, for whatever reason, a lot of people, including President Trump, have great respect for. I can't figure out why. If you have any sort of moral compass, then you would know that this man is a war criminal and needs to be treated as such. But anyway, in an address to the Bilderberg Organization in Evian, France in 1992, this is what former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger declared, quote, "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they'll be grateful." Of course, he's referring to the riots, the LA riots that had happened just the year before. He says, "This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatens our very existence. It is then that all the peoples of the world will plead with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government." Now, we saw a microcosm of that with 9/11. Problem, reaction, solution. Hegelian dialectic. So here they had a plan. They want more government control. They want control over you. They couldn't get it prior to 9/11. They tried passing bills to do such, but they couldn't do it. So they needed an event that would make it happen so that the people would support it. So in 1999, the Project for a New American Century, a think tank that included people like Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz, get together, and they decide that it's necessary in order for the security of the United States to be adequate, that we needed a new Pearl Harbor to get the people on board. And sure enough, 2 years later, we have 9/11, conveniently, coincidentally. And what happens? Exactly what Henry Kissinger said in 1992. That when presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government. Now, in this case, it was the United States to begin with. But if you remember, not soon after, what happened? A coalition got together, right, of all these nations that all took part in this charade until they finally saw the light and they started pulling out. And that's not to say that those governments are right, because they are certainly not. But I will tell you that they followed this plan to a T. Also, July 20th, 1992, Time magazine publishes The Birth of the Global Nation by Strobe Talbott. Now, he's a Rhodes Scholar. Remember Cecil Rhodes from earlier on? Yes. He's also the roommate of Bill Clinton at Oxford University. He's a CFR director, and special bonus, he's a trilateralist. And he was appointed Deputy Secretary of State by President Clinton. Now, in this article, The Birth of a Global Nation, this is what Strobe Talbott writes, quote, "Nationhood as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. All countries are basically social arrangements, no matter how permanent or even sacred they may seem at one time. In fact, they are all artificial and temporary. Perhaps national sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. But it's taken the events in our own wondrous and terrible century to clinch the case for world government. Now again, they pushed, and the people rose up and they start to backpedal. And that's why we see today the nationalist movements that are afoot. Now, whether or not they have tweaked their plan to bring about this divide and conquer where you pit nationalists versus globalists, I don't know. But I can tell you that it's not going to end well as long as people maintain their apathy. 1993, a second Parliament of World Religions is held in Chicago on the 100th anniversary of the first. Like the first convention, this one seeks to join all the religions of the world into one harmonious whole, but it wants to make them merge back into their original element. Traditional beliefs of monotheistic religions such as Christianity are considered incompatible with individual enlightenment and must be drastically altered. Again, this is very in line with Alice Bailey's teachings and the Lucis Trust at the United Nations. It plays hand in hand, a world religion. Love your government God. That's what they want. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Hindu, it doesn't matter. They don't like it. If it's monotheistic, no way. The only monotheism they want is government worship. They want you to worship them. That's their ultimate goal. They want the shift away from a supernatural being into one that they become the gods. That's why there's such a push for immortality. You know, they want to circumvent God's will. Unbelievable. July 18th, 1993, our friend Henry Kissinger comes back again. CFR member and trilateralist. He writes in the Los Angeles Times concerning the North American Free Trade Agreement, something that President Trump has vowed to change. Quote, "What Congress will have before it is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system, a first step towards a new world order." And again, you're seeing a lot of pushback. A lot of pushback from trying to spread the wealth, you know? And let's be honest, capitalism is a flawed system because it does nothing but cultivate greed. And greed is probably the number one problem we have in the world today. It's why the healthcare system is the way it is. It's why the banking system is the way it is. It's why we have super corporations that have basically gobbled everything up, all the mom and pops. It all has to do with greed. But that doesn't mean I'm a fan of socialism, because socialism is not the answer either, because as you learned earlier in this presentation, socialism is actually a kind word for the New World Order's push for communism or Luciferianism within our society. In 1994, in the Human Development Report published by the UN Development Program, there was a section called Global Governance for the 21st Century. The administrator for this program was appointed by Bill Clinton, and his name was James Gustav Spieth. The opening sentence of the report said, quote, "Mankind's problems can no longer be solved by a national government. What is needed is a world government, and this can be best achieved by strengthening the United Nations system." Also in 1994, President Bill Clinton signs Presidential Decision Directive 25 and then declares it classified so the American people can't see what it says. The summary of PDD 25 issued to members of Congress tells us that it authorizes the president to turn over control of the U.S. military to UN command. Interesting. Also 1994, the globalists realize that as more and more people begin to wake up to what's going on, they only have a limited amount of time in which to implement their policies. So speaking at the UN Ambassadors Dinner, David Rockefeller remarks, quote, this present window of opportunity during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built will not be open for too long. They're seeing it now. We're on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, 9/11, and the nation will accept the New World Order. Well, didn't quite go according to plan now, did it, Mr. Rockefeller? 1995. Popular Science magazine describes a top-secret U.S. Navy installation called HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which, by the way, just got taken over privately and is back in use today. This project beams powerful radio energy into the Earth's atmosphere. Two of the goals of the program is to develop the capability of manipulating local weather and mind control using the techniques developed by Bernard Eastland. By the way, it's been employed since 1990, and we can get into HARP and everything that it does in a future news brief. But let me tell you something. It has many, many uses. Also, September 27th, 1995, the State of the World Forum took place in the fall of this year, sponsored by the Gorbachev Foundation, located at the Presidio in San Francisco. Foundation President Jim Garrison chairs the meeting of the who's who from all around the world, including Margaret Thatcher, Maurice Strong, George Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and others. Conversation centers around the oneness of mankind and the coming global government. However, the term global governance is now being used in place of New World Order, since the latter has become a political liability, being a lightning rod for opponents of global government. In 1996, the UN publishes a 420-page report, Our Global Neighborhood. It outlines a plan for global governance, calling for an international conference on global governance. In 1998, for the purpose of submitting to the world the necessary treaties and agreements for ratification by the year 2000. And of course, here we go. The Project for a New American Century. My friends, this is one of the sickest think tanks that has existed in this country. And it was written before the September 11th attacks. And during political debates of the war in Iraq, a section of Rebuilding America's Defenses, entitled, quote, Creating Tomorrow's Dominant Force, became the subject of considerable controversy. The passage suggested that the transformation of American armed forces through new technologies and operational concepts was likely to be a long one, absent, of course, of some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. Journalist John Pilger pointed this passage when he argued that the Bush administration had used the events of September 11th as an opportunity to capitalize on long-desired plans. Prominent members of PNAC, of course, included Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Dick Cheney, R. James Woolsey, Elliot Abrams, Donald Rumsfeld, Robert Zoellick, and John Bolton. Also in 1997, now this is huge. You want to talk about the militarization of the police? This is how it happens. The U.S. government has been militarizing local police with some of the most state-of-the-art equipment imaginable through a program known as the 1033 program, passed by Congress to provide law enforcement agencies with offensive assault equipment for fighting terrorism. Now, this has been the arming of local law enforcement, the likes of which has never been seen in this country's history. U.S. police have been provided with M16 assault rifles, bulletproof Kevlar body protection with knee pads, vests, and helmets. They received flash grenades and tear gas grenade launchers, armed personnel carriers with battering rams, tear gas launchers, and turret on tops. And they've also got armored tanks. They've got Shadowhawk drones, night vision, grenade launcher with grenade launcher edition. They've got other Army equipment. But from FY01, fiscal year 2001, to fiscal year 2012, nearly $35 billion in federal grants were awarded to the police. Let me say this. Countries like Russia, that's almost half their military budget for a year. Just to put it in perspective. Unbelievable. October 26, 2001, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, President George Bush signs the USA Patriot Act, standing for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act. The attacks of 9/11 were classic problem reaction solution, as according to former U.S. Representative Ron Paul, quote, "The Patriot Act was written many, many years before 9/11. The attacks simply provided an opportunity for some people to do what they wanted to do." And of course, the act kicked the erosion of constitutional rights and privacy in the U.S. and gave the huge boost to the ever-growing police state. And finally, 2001 to present. Now, this is in conclusion. Just since 9/11, we've had more laws that have been enacted in the U.S. to restrict personal freedom and constitutional rights than any time before in our nation's history. You know, and that also includes World War II with the detention of Japanese Americans, because you did not have this level of police state nor the technology used to invade your privacy. So here's an example, just to look at what your Congress has done to you under the guise of saving, quote, democracy. That's their word. And making you safe through the shameless use of fear and unchecked terror. Check this out. You have the authorization for use of military force. You've got Homeland Security Act, the FISA Amendments Act, the Military Commissions Act, the Homegrown Terrorism Act, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, the National Defense Resource Preparedness Act, and of course, every year they throw some nice riders into the National Defense Authorization Act to just make things oh so good. And that, my friends, is the end. I want to give a special shout out to the people over at Michael Journal for putting together a fabulous timeline and a ton of good resources that have really helped put this presentation together. So thank you, Michael Journal, for doing that. And again, folks, I just can't preface this enough. This is the plan in their own words. And I hope that it was enlightening. And I hope that you learned something. I'm Joe Joseph. This was the DailySheeple.com's Daily News Brief, and I'll have one again for you tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.